it's the scariest. It's certainly the highest consequence. The current of the water.
Is wild ice skating fundamentally different than ice skating? Or is it really just ice skating outside?
It's kind of a dorky term, and I have a little like internal battle about how much to use it or promote it because I mean, before there was wild ice skating, there was just ice skating. I mean, the what's really different is that in the rink you're not skating over water, right? And so the outdoor ice, um, I guess there is always a chance of breaking through the ice and getting wet.
What do you like about it?
I mean, in the simplest terms, it's just this like childhood play. It's super easy. You're gliding, you're changing direction, but it's not like running or jumping or playing basketball or something. And so just the efficiency of the glide and the forgiveness, I think it's actually quite it's what's the right way to say it? I was going to say it was easy to learn, and it's not that it's easy to learn, but it doesn't take long to be able to do the basic stuff, to move around like half an hour. Anybody can get out there in half an hour and feel like, okay, I'm skating. Those are all super rewarding aspects of it for me.
There is something about it though when I watch it. Like even though it's kind of a simple thing, like it seems crazy.
It seems totally crazy.
What is it about it? Like why do you think that that is?
Well, I mean, like, what part of our human evolution thought like, hey, it'd be really smart to slide around on these sharp blades on a hard material that can break under our feet, right? Like that doesn't really serve human evolution at all. But it goes way back, like historically, thousands of years. I think, and I don't know if this is true, but when I was in high school physics, I still remember this, where the teacher said, or the book, whatever, said that the lowest friction setting you can find on Earth is a skim of water on ice. And so I think there's probably this just human, uh, Neanderthal brain that's just like, whoa, this is cool. I'm traveling without friction. And that definitely feels true for me. The glide, we talk a lot about the glide. It's like, I just went 30 feet on one stride. Like that is so fun and novel.
Is it dangerous? Do you feel like it's a dangerous thing?
You know what? And I do pay attention to this because I teach. I'm a ice rescue instructor. What goes wrong most often is are impact injuries. So maybe um, breaking a wrist, landing on a knee or an elbow, hitting your head. That'd be pretty serious on ice. So that's what goes wrong most of the time statistically. What people I think are more aware of and more worried about, the perceived risk is of breaking through ice and going into the water, and that is super scary. Statistically, it's not as big a deal.
How often would you say that, like, okay, has that happened to you before when you've been out doing it where you just cracked through it?
It happens quite often when I am on shallow water and I know the consequences going to my knees and not much past that. So like we will skate a bunch of marshes and swamps here. And there it's like, oh no, I got my feet wet. It's not a big deal. On deeper ice, I don't really mess with thin ice when it's deeper water. But so this season in particular, and I'm most aware of what's going on in South Central Alaska. I think that there were 3 or 4 people that broke through the ice in the early weeks of the skating season, and that feels like a lot to me. But there were a lot of people going out, hundreds and hundreds. Um, so again, statistically, I don't know how significant that is, and I don't think for any of those people that it was a scary experience.
It's usually not.
I just thought I better add to that we Eagle River, which is just outside of Anchorage where I live, there was actually a fatality just last week where a woman went on river ice, and that's a different story because you got current under the ice. It's a much scarier, higher risk environment. And a woman was swept under the ice just last week. She was out walking her dogs. So there's real risk to it for sure. And I shouldn't underplay that.
Is this something that, not to kind of relate this back to the event that we just talked about, but is this the kind of thing like, look, if something happens to somebody, they're usually pushing it or they just got really unlucky? Or is this more of a thing that like, oh, this can happen to anybody at any time?
I think it's rarely a surprise. I think the people that break through are thinking, "Oh, yep, I know I'm pushing it," and so for the 3 or 4 people that I talked to this year, they're all wearing safety gear. They've got ice picks. They might have a life vest on. Like they kind of know they're pushing it, so it's not a big surprise within this community. I will say, and I don't know how in the weeds you want to get with any of this, but early season ice, these these breakthroughs that I'm describing, that's really different than late season ice. And the difference is that now the thickness is a pretty good proxy for strength. So if you go out there and you know there's 4 inches of ice, you're pretty much good to go as a skater. If I try that same thing in March, 4 inches of ice isn't necessarily strong enough to support my weight. And it's a question of sort of the the internal strength of the ice, and ice can rot from within, especially when it gets a bunch of solar radiation. Um, but for example, in January of this year, I guess almost a whole year ago in New Hampshire, there were 3 ice fishing fatalities in 4 days, something like that, and it was like 8 inches of ice. That should be enough ice. It was enough ice for them to be driving ATVs and snow machines out. But then in the late afternoon, with a bunch of solar radiation, that ice was rotten, and a few people broke through and drowned.
I might not make this a very good analogy, but I think it'll make enough sense, right? Like, so it can be like 4 inches of solid ice, like concrete, or it can be like 4 inches of solid ice, kind of like Swiss cheese.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, if you just make those holes really small, that's a pretty good analogy. The what's going on is that it's the what rots first are the boundaries between the ice crystals. And so if you could kind of put all the holes of that Swiss cheese model up against grain boundaries, and then once those boundaries are shot, the crystals can kind of slide or break past one another. That's the difference between the early ice and the late ice.
All right, so you need this much ice. Like, how many inches, centimeters, whatever of ice do you need? Like, okay, you can do it at this much. You really should wait till this much.
Yeah, you're going to get different answers depending on who you ask. And if you ask the municipality, they're going to give you a really big number, right? Because they want to err on the side of, so for example, in Anchorage, I think they'll say you need 5 inches before you consider going out on ice skating. Like at 5 inches, maybe the city puts a sign up that says, or takes the sign down that says thin ice. Um, the physics of 5 inches is that can support a huge load. But the city wants to make sure that a group of kids can play hockey and maybe encounter a thin spot and still have enough ice. So there's that answer. And then for me personally, with the skating I do, and it's often in remote settings where there isn't anybody to help or anybody to tell you ahead of time how thick the ice is. The magic numbers for me are 2 inches and 4 inches. So is that 5 centimeters and 10 centimeters. At 2 inches, will support me, and I can kind of get away with it. But I'm on high alert, and I test the ice strength as I go pretty frequently. 4 inches is like just kind of like I can relax a little bit, let the pressure off my shoulders, and it's like, okay, sweet, green light, we can run with this. I'll go faster. I'll check less frequently. So those are the numbers that I keep track of, 2 and 4, and I check them throughout the outing.
When you look at kind of the ice, like say, let's just use a lake for an easy example, right? Like, will you generally find like if it's 2 inches on the shore, it's 2 inches in the middle, or are you going to be like, nope, it's going to be 2 inches here, and it's going to be 3 feet here, and it's going to be half an inch here, or is it pretty like no, when it's pretty uniform throughout whatever surface of body of water you're using?
So the strategy is you always want to know how strong the ice is under you, but it's unrealistic to check it every 3 feet, right? Um, there are different ways to gauge the strength of the ice, and we could talk about that. Um, but the shortcut is to assume that any ice that looks the same, that has the same kind of texture or surface, is probably from the same age, same sort of crystallization event. And so if I test that ice on its edge, I will generally assume that it's the same throughout that body of ice. But then that body can be bound by different bodies, and there's usually visual cues that you've crossed into a different chunk of ice. And it can be that um, it can be a little step up or a little step down, where there was older ice that was thicker and therefore more buoyant, and so it stands tall. Or it can be the color, if there was snow on the surface or even a wind texture. There are a lot of different ways to sort of get clued in that I've just crossed from one sort of, I'll treat it as uniform chunk of ice into another chunk of ice. So I stop and I check the thickness, the strength of that new body of ice. That makes sense?
Yeah, right. Like if it looks different, check it again.
Exactly. It's that simple. And it's easy to say that it's that simple. But then when you're flying out there, because you can move at 10 miles an hour, it does sometimes take just sort of this like a personal contract to stop and then recheck the strength of the ice.
How do you check it? You just stick a sharp pole down there, is what I'm imagining.
Exactly. So what we carry are ice probes, and they're made specifically for some of this outdoor ice skating. And you just smash the ice, smash, smash, smash. They've got these big steel tips, sharp steel tips, and with that, it's kind of like a personal calibration. But if I smack at the ice twice and I'm able to break through it, I know it's just enough to support my weight, but right on the edge. If I smash through it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times before the pull pops all the way through, then I'm feeling pretty confident about the strength of the ice.
Now, is there any kind of advantage to skating thin ice, right? Like, are there certain people that would be like, oh, but thin ice is the best ice?
There's certainly a sub community of skaters that really seek out that thin ice thrill. A lot of those folks are wearing dry suits and different protective equipment because I think they know they're more likely to break through. The main motivation to skate thin ice is that that's generally black ice or the crystal clear ice, so you get to see through it. And if there are cool textures on the lake bed, that can be really rewarding visually. There are also some fun sounds, and then for the people that are sort of motivated by that, sort of playing on the edge of their risk envelope, um, then you're always a little bit on edge, like, oh, I just pulled off something, and so that does appeal to a number of skaters, and then there are a number that don't mess with it. They wait for that sort of 4 inches. They wait to see that somebody else has already gone out there.
The thing, but now how long is the season, right? Because how does the snow not just cover up the ice on the lake?
It depends where you go. But for example, in Alaska, it's pretty typical that we'll have a sort of a first freeze if it's cold and clear before the snow falls. And so that'll be the first window of skating. And then it is true that we'll get snow on that ice. But if there's a thaw, and this happens more and more now with climate change, if there's a bunch of rain, or if there's a bunch of warm temperatures, then that snow can melt or partially melt and resurface the lake and be skatable again. That type of snow we call white ice because it's usually got some of the trapped air that was in the snow. Black ice is the stuff that's just perfectly clear. It grows down into the water. White ice is ice that kind of grows up into the air because it's capturing snow and turning it into ice. But we'll get several of those pulses through the winter, even in the middle of January if a big warm front moves through. The other thing that can happen is that the load of the snow on the ice can cause, you can imagine just the ice getting bent down into the surface of the water, and that can cause water to come up through cracks and holes and then flood the ice. And that will again cause like a new surface of white ice.
Would you say, is there a difference between like, okay, skating on a lake versus a river versus a marsh?
Yeah, there's big differences between those. What I like about marsh skating is that the consequences feel less significant. If I break through, it's again that sort of knee deep water. and that makes me feel like, oh, sure, I'll try this. I'll skate some thinner ice than I would otherwise. It's also super fun and dynamic to carve around all of the marsh grasses. That can be a lot of fun. Skating lakes, that's where I at least feel more confident about the uniformity of the ice, and I really like the large lakes. Or we have a handful of canoe trail systems here, so it's like you'd canoe at a lake and then portage to the next lake and then portage to the next, and we've been able to skate those. So you can do these loops and get on 14 different lakes in 4 hours, covering 20 miles. So that style of skating is very fun. And then rivers is what I've done the least of because it's the scariest. It's certainly the highest consequence. The current of the water um, means that there are zones of thicker and thinner ice, and you can't reliably read that from the surface. And so it's much more likely that you would accidentally find thin ice. And then if you break through ice and there's a current below you, that's a terrible formula.
Are you ready for some harder slash listener submitted questions?
Yeah, you bet.
What's your favorite place to do this at?
Well, I'm completely biased about being in South Central Alaska, and we don't get a particularly long season, but we get these really different environments, from marshes to rivers to glacial lakes where you can kind of go up near icebergs, to some of these big lakes that are like 1,000 feet deep. Um, so I'm totally biased about doing it here in Alaska.
Is there any place that you would say like that's kind of like every wild ice skater who really loves it wants to go here?
That might be Lake Baikal in Russia, because that's the lake that's most reliably skatable. In fact, I don't know if they still have, but they used to host races, skating events there. I think it must just be like a true desert with very little precipitation, and the ice grows to be meters thick, like just ridiculously thick. And so they're out there with hovercrafts and teams and camps, mobile camps along the ice. So that's probably the most recognized destination within the skating community for outdoor ice.
How popular is this? Is it going up, going down, staying the same?
I think it's getting quite a bit more popular. And I think part of that is that with some of the changes with climate, we're getting longer skating windows. And I think the other part is that it's kind of a low barrier activity. Like if you already have skates, or if you upgrade to new skates, that's that's the main expense. The safety equipment is pretty affordable. Um, and so I think there's a lot of families, a lot of young adults, they're just sort of rediscovering skating.
What is your best tip?
This isn't a direct answer, but I feel like anybody that goes out on good ice, smooth ice, um, and doesn't fall, doesn't get injured, uh, is gonna end that day thinking like that was awesome, and I want to do more of it. And so the best tip I think is probably just to go try it. And I would not recommend going to some novel place with thin ice that nobody's been to before, as your first outing. Like I'd go where people go, whether that's a city maintained or monitored lake or otherwise. Bring a thermos of hot chocolate and make an easy, fun day out of it. But I think just that sort of childhood ease of travel when you get to glide like that. I think everybody comes out of that feeling like that was a worthwhile use of their time.
And I steal a line from my wife, but she always says like people love to go wee, like wee. It's
Oh
kind of
yeah.
like that, like when you're just like shh
Oh, it is
wee.
completely that. And that's great. My wife and I have this too, and she'll go wee really long, and then we'll reach a rest stop, and I'll just say wee. Like little short, like that's our little internal joke. So yeah, we're same boat for sure.
um, are people starting to push it? Do you think that if it's getting more popular, that people are kind of starting to push it?
Yeah, yeah, and I think I'm one of those people. We've done some remote trips, and I've come back mostly like years later once I got more formal in my training with ice rescue and understanding what can go wrong, and looking back and being like, whoa, I can't believe I did that. Generally, I can't believe I did that without testing the ice's strength as we went, or without carrying the right safety equipment, or without having practiced some of the rescue scenarios. But for sure, I think like any sport, um, there's it's like a bell curve, right? And there's that top 10% of the enthusiasts are going to be pushing what's possible and trying to redefine what's possible. These are like the free solo climbers in the rock climbing world. And for ice, those are probably the people that are playing on thin ice and remote ice. And that's probably going to go really well for a lot of people. And then it's probably going to bite a few people in the butt.
Is it ultimately though, when you kind of look at the danger factor of it, is it just coming down to like, look, it's not so much that you're doing it in this place, it's that you're doing it on this thin ice, right? Like, if throwing out a dramatic example, you find a lake at the top of Mount Everest, right? Like, is it crazy, or not crazy, but is it dangerous because of the remoteness, or is it dangerous like, no, you're just, that ice isn't good enough to do that?
Yeah, that's another great question. It's like our this is again sort of in the weeds, but one framework to talk about risk assessment is and this is largely coming from the natural disaster community, like landslides, earthquakes, is to think about risk in terms of the hazard, the exposure, and the vulnerability. So the hazard is a thing that can go wrong. Like it's something we don't have any control over. And that would be like the strength of the ice, being on thin ice. Could also be cold air, cold water, the blowing air, like all of these environmental factors that we don't control. The exposure is what's exposed to that hazard, and that's often a decision for us. Like I am choosing to skate this lake on the top of these Himalayan peaks or at Mount Everest, whatever your
Yeah,
example
whatever.
was.
Yeah.
And then the vulnerability is like, how bad is the damage going to be if things do go wrong, if I'm exposed to this hazard? Like, what's going to happen if I do break through this ice? And that vulnerability we have a lot of control over. So if I go through the ice wearing a dry suit and a life vest and with these picks already in my hands, it's not that big of a deal. It's actually kind of fun. If I go through the ice as a 3 year old kid and my parent is 200 feet away, that's a big deal, right? So the vulnerability depends on your experience, your training, your equipment. So that all those three things together, exposure, vulnerability, hazards, those all kind of overlap to to define that overall risk. Um, and so it's this balance of where are you doing it, what's your experience, what equipment are you using, and then how good are your communication skills with your team? You know, does somebody recognize thin ice and not say it, or is somebody in your group really pushing and not checking in with the group because of their own personal objectives? Like all of those things come into play.
So looking at this, like, where is this? Why does that ice look like that? That kind of stuff.
So this is Rabbit Lake. This is a 5 mile, 4.5 mile hike from Anchorage. And this was from late October, which was the earliest I'd ever skated. But we just had these unusual cold and clear conditions, unusual for October, that allowed this ice to form quickly and cleanly. So there's very little trapped air in it, and this setting, which is up in the alpine, up above tree line, that means you can tell there's no soil there. There's no trees on the edges, like dropping pollen into the lake. So it's just a very pristine lake bed and ice.
Now, how thick would the ice there be?
What's your guess?
3 inches.
Yeah, right on. 3 to 4 inches. Yep, spot on. So we go to a lake like this, and I skate the whole perimeter, because if we go back to, or I shouldn't say go back, but we skate the whole perimeter because that's sort of, um, if something goes wrong, you're close to the edge, right? You can get out of the water. And I test the strength of the ice along the entire perimeter of the lake. And then I got some confidence, like, yeah, it's all 3 to 4 inches. Let's start moving towards the center and playing around with where these rocks were.
Now, okay, on a scale of like 1 to 10, how rare is this kind of an occurrence, right? Like, you're going to get, this happens every year, or like, man, I've never seen that before.
To the combination in this video of being able to visit alpine lakes and then have such good ice, that this is the first time I've ever been able to do it after 12, 13 years of pursuing this stuff pretty actively. So I think this was very rare in my experience. We'll get just as good ice other years, other times of the year. But the combination of this alpine setting with that ice, with the lake bed, that was unique here.
So that's a river, then I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, this is a very low flow river, which you can maybe get a sense of because of the meanders. And so this is one where I'm a little like every one of those dark bands that we skate over. It's like, is that going to be thin ice? And so initially we're testing the thickness quite frequently, and then we start getting confident that it's well behaved ice, and then kind of opened the gates and started moving a bit faster.
That really kind of shows like the difference you were talking about, and like, okay, well, there's a change in the ice.
Yeah,
Like there, I
exactly.
can see like, okay, that, and it does look like, oh, that's pretty dramatic, right? It's
Yeah,
not like, is this light blue or light baby blue, right? It's like,
exactly.
oh, that's blue and that's red kind of thing.
Yep, and that's I think that's pretty typical. If it's a color shade like that, it's usually pretty obvious. Or there are some settings that have these little frost flowers, and you can get like different flower density. These are the crystals that grow on the ice. But that's a really cool way to see different bodies of ice as well. There's all these really cool visual indicators.
And that's a marsh, right? Oh, that's all over the place.
Yeah, so this is again some low volume, low current creeks, and then a bunch of swampy, marshy lands. Um, this is an environment favored by muskrat, so we'll see a bunch of little muskrat mounds throughout the day. Uh,
Do you feel like you have to be in really good shape to do it for a long time, or is this kind of like, man, this is pretty easy, honestly?
Gosh, it's pretty easy. I will say that if I do a long day on my hockey skates, I definitely feel that in my legs. And then if I do that same long day in my Nordic skates, that's what we're wearing in this video. Um, they're so efficient, the Nordic skates, that I don't get nearly as much fatigue.
Okay, so this is a rescue. Kind of walk me through it a little bit.
So this is one of the ice rescue training courses that I taught earlier this winter. And I only teach these on thin ice. When I took my formal training, we had something like 18 inches of ice, and the team prepped it by cutting out a huge hole in the ice. But getting out of the ice was kind of like getting out of a swimming pool. There wasn't much to it, that's a very unrealistic experience. And so my philosophy in all of my the outdoor education work I do is that I want the training to be as realistic as possible. And so we went out to this lake. I had scoped it out ahead of time, and I knew that it was just barely thick enough to support a person's weight. And so we go out, and I have this progression of exercises that people work through to get comfortable pulling themselves out of the water. They're wearing dry suits and life vests in these clips, but then the final iteration of the course is the option to go in just in their street clothes, just in their skating clothes. And so most people choose to do that because we're close to the cars, close to home. But that is a very different experience going in without all the extra flotation. Your face goes under the water. There's a little bit of a panic, even for me doing this professionally and having practiced it a bunch. Like when I do that as part of this training, I have that same panic attack. It was just like, what the heck? I didn't. It makes sense why people panic and why that causes so much problems when people break through the ice.
Now, in that one, why is she covering her mouth? Is that like a training part of it, or is that, oh, that she just happened to do that?
No, that's training, and that's a good observation. What she's trying to avoid there is this gasp reflex, and your previous episode with the cold weather expert um, talked about this as well. Like we have this reflex as mammals, and I can't explain it as well as your PhD, but I think of it as like the human brain is like something's about to go wrong here, and I want to get as much oxygen in my lungs as possible and lock it off. And that's a great response unless your mouth is at the water line or below, and then you can pull in a bunch of water. and have trouble breathing. And so the technique to avoid that is just to try to build muscle memory that you automatically put a hand over your mouth when you realize you're about to break through the ice.
I think if I can kind of paraphrase what he said really quick, is like basically our body is just conditioned that if we get really cold really quickly, we take a huge breath of air, and in the water you can fill it up with water and then you drown and die, which is a problem, when you look at that. Now, if somebody was by themselves, right, in ice that's, not, I can put my feet on the ground, can you get out of that? Or is it easy if you're on the side? Could you pull yourself out with your hands? Or do you have to have like equipment or somebody with you to get you out of there?
It's pretty easy to, gosh, I mean, I shouldn't even say that pretty easy. What I will say is that if you carry the ice picks, and this is like the $10 investment, I mean, there's no reason not to have ice picks. We wear them around our necks. You can see them in these videos. Um, with ice picks, that's what provides the traction to claw your way out of the ice. Um, then that makes it much easier to get yourself out of the ice. With enough practice, you can do it without the ice picks. But at that point, it's kind of like a party trick. Like, why would you do it without the ice
Yeah.
picks? Like, everybody should have the ice picks. They're cheap, they're easy, they're intuitive. Um, so for me personally, with the practice that I've done, I'm not that worried about breaking through the ice, even if I'm on my own in the middle of nowhere, because I've gone through the motions. I know what to expect, and I know how to get myself out. Um,
Yeah,
and
that
then
would
we also we also carry a rope in case somebody does have trouble getting out. There's a great guideline here. It's called the 1-10-1, um, and that refers to 1 minute, 10 minutes, 1 hour. Then the first minute is that's when you really need to get your breathing under control. So if you got some water in your lungs when you broke through, or if you just panicked, you have a minute. You can take a minute to chill out, like just get on your back and breathe. That's what matters the most. And then you have about 10 minutes where you can use your muscles, where you can functionally tread water. You have grip strength to hold onto the ice picks or to grab a rope if somebody's thrown you a rope. And then you have maybe an hour ish before you might get hypothermia. And there are this is taught in most of the ice rescue trainings across the world, I assume. And it's a great guideline. And it really just more than anything there to emphasize the first thing to do is to find a way to relax, just chill out, have confidence, make a plan, and then do it. And if you can get that far, the rest is probably going to be just fine.
Oh, that's pretty.
This is Justin, one of the guys I started playing hockey with, and he has a lot more skate control than I do. It was a lot of fun to chase him around.
That ice looks a lot different to me.
Yeah, this is on Kenai Peninsula, so a couple hours south of Anchorage, and it was black ice, so it's that same really nice strong ice that grows down into the water, and then it's got some of these frost flowers on the surface. So this is basically like crystallized dew.
That's crazy.
It's so cool. And that's where I was mentioning that, like, if you saw a transition from more or less frost flowers across a boundary, then you'd think, oh, okay, that ice must be a different age. And that's where I would test it again with the probe. That's what Pat is doing here.
That's pretty much all the questions that I got. Is there anything that you think that we missed, or kind of? I know you teach some classes on wild ice skating and rescue. Like, how can people find out more? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, good question. There aren't a lot of resources online. Most of the formal training is for rescue professionals and fire departments. That's the training that I went through, and a lot of it's not very relevant to recreational skaters. And so the courses I teach in Anchorage, I kind of cherry picked those aspects from the formal training and combined that to what I'd learned with my own experience. But there aren't a lot of people doing that. There are a few groups in Canada teaching courses like that. I created an online course to sort of fill that gap for people that don't have access to in-person training here in Alaska. Um, But I think at the most fundamental level, it's like if you go out to a lake and there are a bunch of people that have already been out skating, it's probably a pretty safe destination for you to be skating on. The caveat there is that that changes in the spring when the ice starts to rot, like we talked about earlier. That was a really long uh, sort of closing thought for you, but that's what comes to mind.